Welcome, everyone. This is Lisa Colton from Darim Online and C3 Communications. So glad that you're with us today for our third webinar in our series on maturing your social media practice in your synagogue. Today we have Miriam Brousseau with us. I will introduce her in more detail shortly. Just as a reminder, this session is being recorded, and the recording, as well as the slides and links to any resources that we mention, will be shared both in an email to everyone who has registered for this series, and they are also posted on the darimonline.org website, where you can find all the resources from all 5 of these webinars being posted as they happen. We encourage you to use the chat and questions features in your webinar control panel to ask questions, to share your own experiences, and comment on anything. We've had some vibrant conversation there in the past webinars, and as we kind of get to the end of each section in Miriam's presentation today, we'll be surfacing those questions and answering them as well. So please feel free to use that. Just as a little introduction to our session today, I'm going to set our context a bit, connecting today's topic to the last few webinars that we've done in this series as a whole. And we'll talk a little bit about why social is so critical. What are the transitions from the old rules to the new rules, or maybe they're all the same old rules? Miriam will tell us. And then dive into some specific examples around intentionality and transparency and authenticity, with a number of examples from congregations so that you can feel inspired, see what it looks like when it's done well, and translate that into your own work, maybe even later today. We'll be talking about a lot of theory as well as a lot of very practical things today. As a little bit of context, I want to go back to this image that we looked at in our first webinar, thinking about the relationship between the synagogue as an organization, a legal entity, a building, a 501c3, whatever, and where the social components are that underlay that synagogue. And this pyramid really illustrates the importance of individual relationships as that connective tissue to build a sense of community that you then infuse with Jewish practice. It becomes a congregation, and the need to have a strong and sustainable congregation in order to have a strong and sustainable synagogue as an organization. And we know that communication is a really critical aspect of any relationship, whether it's between two friends, between a parent and child, between husband and wife, or partners, even in business. And so we're looking today at social media as one kind of communication that's incredibly powerful and useful for building that sense of interpersonal connection and empowering this pyramid. As we think about that, I also want to remind you of this shift from a hub and spokes model to a more network model that we are moving to. So for the past decades, if not hundreds of years, we've really been in this hub and spokes model, where in our case, the synagogue is the hub, literally where people come into the building. But also if you think about putting together a print newsletter or an e-newsletter, any kind of communication is designed at the hub and broadcast out to the spokes. And that's the model that most of us grew up in, most of us were educated in, much of our professional practice has been in. But today, given today's technologies, we're moving to this much more network model. And we looked at these images in a previous webinar as well, where individuals have many more ways to connect to one another, whether that's one-on-one or as a group conversation. And this has always been true of in-person engagement, and is now true of digital communications as well. This network map is one person's network on Facebook, just a map of those relationships. So today, as we think about communicating for social, I want you to keep in mind this shift from a broadcast mode to more of a social and relational mode. And even if you are speaking on behalf of the synagogue, even behind a name and a logo, like on a Facebook page or a Twitter account, or maybe acting as yourself, to keep in mind that social component and designing for social in your communications and the powerful emotional, psychological, and communal impact that that can have. So with that introduction, I want to turn it over to Miriam Brosseau, who is my go-to person on all things social media related. She's the Director of Engagement at C3 Communications, which I think says a lot about her expertise in this area. It's really about engagement and conversation and connection. And she's also the Program Director of ELI Talks, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. She's my colleague at C3 Communications, and we've collaborated even before Miriam was at C3 in many ways, and delighted to have her with us today. Miriam.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm really thrilled to be here with everyone and learning with you today. This is one of my very, very favorite topics to talk about and learn with people about. And in many ways, it's really the foundation of a solid social media strategy and approach to a whole new set of tools and technologies that we have at our disposal today. And I just want to take a moment to really hone in on what you said in your introduction, Lisa, which is this shift from the broadcast model of communications to social. And it's really akin to the shift that media went through in moving from radio to television. So what we have in front of us here, and I may not attempt to play it because I'm not sure entirely what will happen, but what we have here in front of us, and you're welcome to Google it, is the world's first ever television ad. And if you watch it, basically it is this still image of the map of the 48 contiguous United States, which are the ones that existed at the time. This Bulova watch just sort of slapped over that map, and then this very authoritative male voice coming in partway through saying, "America runs on Bulova time," and that's the end of the ad. And it's, I think it's really illustrative of the shift that we were going through as the world was moving from this very powerful medium of radio to an even more powerful medium of television. Early on in that shift, television was learning from radio. It was taking all of the lessons that it had learned in those many years of having radio in people's homes and shifting into this new medium. And so this first television ad is a still image. There wasn't really that understanding of the possibilities of the interplay between the image and the audio and what the potential really was there. And it's very, very short. It's very direct. And you think about an ad like this in comparison to the ads that we see in the Super Bowl, for instance, that are just wildly imaginative and full of story and really maximizing the potential that we see inside of television as a medium. It took us 100 years to get there, but now we're at the point where we really understand the potential of television and are at really a breaking point with where that's going to go. The same thing is happening as we move more generally, more conceptually from the world of broadcast, from that world of hub and spoke communication, to the world of social and that world of networked communication. What's happening is that, as Lisa mentioned, all of us have grown up to one extent or another in that world of broadcast. This is where we learned our messages about mass communication. And we take those messages, those lessons, and we translate them into the world of social. And to an extent, that's perfectly natural and exactly what we should be doing and what happened at the break from radio to television. At the same time, digital is an entirely different animal. This is a new beast. This is a place where the possibilities are wildly greater than what most of us take advantage of. And so as we make this shift from the broadcast model of communication to the networked social digital groundwork of communicating with one another, we need to simultaneously unlearn a lot of what we've gathered in this long age of broadcast that we're just at the tail end of, and at the same time relearn or reinvoke all of those skills that we've learned as actual human beings interacting in the world along the way. all of us are social creatures. All of us exist in a web of relationships, and we know what that feels like, and we know what that requires. And the challenge of the social world is to take all of that and bring it online, to reflect that through these tools and technologies that we have at our disposal. And so I just want to acknowledge, first of all, that it's hard and it takes practice, and it does require both unlearning and relearning in this sort of wild west of the digital world. But the key, the heart of all of this, is understanding that social media is first and foremost social. It's all about the relationships. It's all about those connections. It's not about exploiting the next shiny, new, exciting technology. It's about serving the community. And so what we're going to be looking at today are what I've referred to as the new rules, but that's a little bit of a misnomer because they're really these very old rules that have governed effective human relationships for thousands of years. And what we'll talk about is what are these quote-unquote rules, and how do they play out in the world of social, in the world of digital, and what does that mean for our synagogues, for our institutions, and for the causes that we care about. And so I'd like to focus on 3 rules, per se, which are really values or guiding principles that should be, I believe, top of mind for you, regardless of your level of comfort or skill in the world of social media. These are things that all of us need to be reminded of. I use them as my sort of North Stars in my work in digital strategy. And each of them has a modern permutation, and then also a Jewish value, a Hebrew root that we can call upon to really help bring this home and ground it in Jewish values and community, which is what we're all about. So those 3 rules are intention, which is equated with kavanah; transparency, which I'm matching up with this phrase of hineni, here I am, this is me in all of my glory and flaws; and authenticity, which I equate to this significantly less familiar term, toho kivaro, which basically means, we'll talk a little bit more about it towards the end of our time together, but essentially means the inside is like the outside. The inside and the outside match. They reflect one another. You're pure through and through. And so let's dive into some of these. We'll see lots of practical examples, but we're using those examples as a way of digging more into the concepts that surround each of these rules, each of these guiding values and principles that we're looking at today. So first of all, let's talk about this idea of intention. And what I often see with a lot of nonprofit organizations especially, and certainly in the Jewish world, is that we all sort of feel obligated to be online, to be involved in social media and have a Facebook presence and a Twitter page and a blog and et cetera, et cetera. It's all very overwhelming, and we're not so great at answering the question, why? What is our intention? What are we trying to accomplish here? One of the great nonprofit social media digital gurus of our age, Beth Cantor, who's written a number of books that are all very worthwhile, encourages us to ask why 3 times, right? So if you're getting on Facebook, if you're diving into a new social media strategy, ask yourself why. Why is this important? Why does this matter to me or to my community? And then once you get that answer, ask why again. And then ask why one more time till you really get to the root of what you are trying to do, who you're trying to be, and what you're trying to accomplish. And so here are a couple of examples that I think really illustrate synagogues, organizations that have a very strong why, and that those whys come through in virtually everything that they do. Temple Israel of Memphis is a synagogue that Lisa has a long history with, and I was introduced to through her work, but they have a fantastic social media presence, and it's worth following them just to get a sense of how they use their voice, how they build community online. And they have this beautiful post of 98-year-old Mary Shaneberg volunteering with the archives group every single week. And you see that just the number of likes and the effusive, just lovely energy that's coming out around this post. And Lisa, if you want to jump in with some of the qualities that you see coming out in this post, I'd be happy to hear. Some of the things that I see are, first of all, this is a great example of tying on land and online, of working under this premise that social media isn't a separate thing that we do, but it's a layer that gets sort of poured over everything else that the synagogue is involved in. So even in this archives group where we have this 98-year-old member of the synagogue who may or may not have a Facebook presence, we're capturing this lovely image of her spending her time there every week. We're giving a space to the community, and we're showing appreciation and respect for the people in that group. And I think the intention behind this post really is that introduction, that community building, that sense that we are not a faceless institution, but we're made up of individuals who have a wide variety of interests and who have, all kinds of different life experience. And it's really nicely captured in this single image here.
Yeah. The one thing I'll add to that, Miriam, is that I love posts like this that connect a name and a face and a conversation starter. So if I then, went to Shabbat services and was at the Kiddush and saw Mary there, I would have something to go talk to her about, and I would be able to make that connection. And it's a wonderful way to get that, cross-pollination, not only between generations, but also between, different kind of subgroups of your community, that often those ties back and forth can be really, really powerful. I know Ishti Bardos, who's the communications director at Temple Israel of Memphis, is on the line with us. So Ishti, if you want to speak up and throw any commentary in the chat or the
Awesome.
Q&A, feel free to do so. In fact, I wonder if I can unmute you. Hold on. See, if we're good techies, we should be able to do this. Ishti, I'm going to unmute you, I think. All right, try saying something. Are you there, Ishti? Oh, maybe not. Anyway, he does a fantastic job of creating these very personal kinds of posts that really the intention, as you say, is to surface the humanity and the stories and the people of the community. Individually, I think it works really well, and collectively, it really makes a powerful impact, especially in a large congregation like Temple Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ishti, we'd love to hear from you if you're on. Otherwise, I'll just keep throwing the compliments. I think the other piece that's really nice to note here is that in the world of broadcast, this particular message could have come out as, we have an archives group every week, come and join us, and maybe a link to sign up or something like that. And instead, what Temple Israel of Memphis has done is found a way to introduce this program in the synagogue through introducing the faces behind it. And so it seems like it's a very subtle, light touch kind of opening to just saying, hey, you know what, we also have an archives group, and maybe you want to hang out with this cool Lady Mary, who's 98 years old and rocking and rolling. There's a couple other examples from Temple Israel. First of all, just again, showing off their mud-slathered community is a really beautiful moment. This is dragging up something from the archives, about 7 or so years ago. They took an Israel trip. It's a great way to invoke those memories, to illustrate quite clearly what kind of community they see themselves as being, and to bringing back those nostalgic times makes you feel really good about that organization and about what they offer and who they are. And it's just a very nice, fun, light touch that does nothing but make people feel good about who you are and what you do. And I think this other example, which is, not exactly, it's not the most exciting or sexiest example of social media, but it's very, very practical and very open, and a really nice way of just tying, again, what's happening in real life to to your online presence. and sharing very openly in a forum that literally invites conversation, and that the option to comment and share and like and all of these things is built into every single post. Sharing this kind of informational stuff is not such a bad thing, and it's a nice simple tie-in, I think. And I'd like to highlight one more example from a New York synagogue, the Community Synagogue. This is a blog post that was shared recently by Nicole Zimmerman, who is involved in that community. Her husband has been the rabbi there. And the Community Synagogue, I think, is a really wonderful example of a place that tries to live its name and its values in absolutely everything that they do. And so this was a blog post following up on the synagogues starting a community theater inside of the synagogue. And at the bottom of this slide, you see an excerpt from that blog post that Nicole wrote. Nicole is in the lower left-hand corner of this picture, depicting, I believe, Rosie and Bye Bye Birdie. And you see some of the comments that came up underneath this blog post that are just so effusive and lovely and indicative of the kind of community that they are trying to be and trying to build. And so in the name of the Community Synagogue, in the program that they put together, in the way that they communicated about that program, openly in a blog that was then shared to Facebook and shared to Twitter and sent out on their email, and inviting openness and conversation. They're really living this value that they wrote about in the content of the post, and the one that they were trying to exhibit in starting this community theater in the first place. The post itself is speaking about the Torah portion, in which everyone is all of the Israelites are commanded to bring a gift to the building of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, this portable center for God's presence to live. And they're equating that with the programs that they do inside of the Community Synagogue and the way that they invite gifts from their community. And I think this is a lovely, lovely example of how this particular synagogue is living their values on every level and reflecting that in their digital communication. So just a couple last points about fostering intention, fostering kavanah, having your why be very clear in everything that you do. Really, as the last example exhibited, I think, so beautifully, ensuring that your vision and goals in social media reflect your vision and goals as an organization. They should match. The way that your Facebook page feels should resemble what it feels like to be part of your community. Knowing the audience that you're speaking to and listening and empathizing is a beautiful thing that we'll talk a little bit more about as we go along. Measuring, reflecting, and iterating, we won't get too deeply into today, but it is important to remember that social media moves very fast, and it's also very forgiving. And so using this as a space to experiment, to try things, to call out different aspects of your work and your cause and your community, those are all open. And trying things and seeing what works and soliciting feedback on all of that this is the place to do it. It's a great opportunity. So Lisa, are there any questions coming in or anything we should address before we move on to the next value?
Of course there are. So the first question is an observation about use of hashtags. So for example, the mud picture from the Dead Sea from Temple Israel had the hashtag TBT, right? So Throwback Thursday is what that means, if you're not familiar with it. And someone was asking, should you, I'll add another part to the question. One is, why are kind of digital traditions like that fun and helpful, and how can you use them to your advantage? And second, why use hashtags? Should you always be using them? How are they helpful?
Excellent. Hashtags really got their start on Twitter, and they've since sort of migrated into Facebook as Facebook has become a more open, kind of free-flowing platform. Hashtags, just as a general rule, are a way of organizing a bigger conversation that is likely intended to happen beyond the confines of your own network. And hashtag TBT, or hashtag Throwback Thursday, is one particular hashtag conversation that has taken off on social media more generally. And so putting that hashtag in your Facebook or Twitter or whatever, or Instagram, for instance, post means that you are not only categorizing that particular post under this is something that's about Temple Israel of Memphis or about my synagogue, but it also relates to this broader conversation that's happening in the rest of the digital world. And so there's a couple reasons that you might decide to add a hashtag to something like this. I think the most obvious is that when you're sharing in the world of social media, you're sharing publicly and intentionally dropping different posts, different ideas into those bigger conversations then opens you up into other possible networks and to other conversations where you might find people who will come across and interact with your content and eventually be drawn into your community on some level or another. And it's also just a fun way to identify the kinds of posts that you're sharing and to give people a little insight into what they're about to see. Lisa, did you have any other thoughts on hashtags?
The only thing I'll add to that, I think these traditions are a nice way to kind of create some rhythms that people can look forward to. And the throwback ones, if you imagine pulling out a photo album from your college years or your family photo album, you go back and you reminisce and you tell stories over and over again. And that's how we create kind of our family or community narratives and our histories and those stories that keep getting told over and over again. And so I think it's powerful to think about in your congregation, like as you think about it kind of as a family, what are the things that you want to tell over and over again, whether that's volunteering or trips to Israel or doing, important social action things outside of the building. You could probably come up with a short list of kind of what are those values or themes that we want to constantly be bringing up, and choosing your Throwback Thursday photos, to do that. Showing fun things at the Dead Sea in Israel is also, kind of planting some seeds in people's heads about a trip that they might go on in the future. The next question, I just want to make sure we have time to go through these and hit all the rest of your content, Miriam. So someone asked about measurement, and I know we're not going to go deep into this today, but I'm wondering if you have any comments on, how do you know if it's working?
Yeah, great. So that's why I put measurement under the intention piece, because measurement and the why you're on social media need to go hand in hand. The things that you measure should match your reasons for being there. If your reason for engaging in social media is to re-engage, for instance, a cohort of Hebrew school alumni, that's a very different why and is going to require very different measurements than if your reason for being on social media is to increase your general reach and visibility in your city, in your community at large. And so measurements like the number of likes or the number of comments or general visibility into different demographic groups, for instance, some of those may matter very much, and some of those may be less important depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And so I think the key with metrics, and I'd be happy to follow up with some additional materials on getting started with metrics and measuring what matters, but the key is to really match up the things that you're measuring to the whatever you're trying to accomplish in your online communication.
Great. And I will just add to that, you have to really develop a culture of social. If you imagine being at
Mm-hmm.
a big event. There are 1,000 people listening to some famous person speak at the stage. And at the end, they say, we're going to take questions. You got to be really brave to be the first person to raise your hand and ask a question. But by the third or fourth, you kind of know how intense the questions are and how long the answers are going to be and like what's the vibe, right? And it's the same
Mm-hmm.
thing here. So sometimes when I see um, congregations try to develop this more intentional or conversational approach, they're asking big, meaty questions or expecting like all these comments to come out of nowhere. And you really need to be a good kind of host and facilitator to start to draw that out. We
Mm-hmm.
had one organization, use this as my classic example, that was asking really meaty, what do you think about, this press conference or that new Israeli policy or such and such? And it was just silence. They couldn't get anybody to talk. And then they were having, it was a school, and they were having like a parent association meeting, and they posted, hope to see you tomorrow morning at the parent association meeting. Do you prefer bagels or muffins? And all of a sudden 20 people had opinions, right? Because it was a very low barrier to entry and there was no right or wrong answer. So
Mm-hmm.
think about that. I would say, in answer to your question, Ellen, about how do you know it's working, engagement is really such an important piece of the puzzle here. And if you see people leaning in and speaking up, or even mentioning posts or photos, in the hallways or in the parking lot, then you know it's working. When it's not just a separate silo, but it's starting to feel integrated into relationships in the life of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Let's see. Any other questions? Someone just asked about what hashtags are, and I'm going to put a link in our follow-up email to a little explanation about that, so that we don't take time out
Great.
of the rest of your content. Okay,
Great.
go ahead, Miriam.
Fantastic. Okay. Transparency. So this is another quality that gets talked about a lot, I think, when it comes to social media and existing in the digital world, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around it. I equate it to this Jewish value, as it were, of hineni, which is essentially, here I am, stepping up and saying, this is who I am inside and out. What you share, how much you share is completely up to you. There's no rule that you have to be sharing absolutely everything about yourself. There's a saying from this book called Open Management that talks about transparency as a sandbox, that you're under no obligation to share absolutely everything about your organization, but you do need to sort of clearly delineate what are the things that you're willing to share, what's inside of that sandbox, and what are the rules for sharing inside of that. I mean, inside a sandbox, everybody gets to play and everybody gets to have fun, but there's no stealing my truck and there's no throwing stand and all of that, and you can determine those rules around your level of transparency. But in general, I would say that there is a certain expectation that has developed in the digital world that anything about you is anything about you as an organization and potentially you as a person, depending on your own point of view on this, is public unless you choose to make it private. And that's a little bit of just the attitude around transparency in social media in the digital world. So, but let's take a little bit about how this "Who Are You" piece plays out online for an organization. So the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, I think, does a very nice job of delineating that sandbox of transparency and saying who they are in very clear, fun, engaging ways that actually do help build community. And they release an annual report on the state of the Jewish Reconstructionist communities. And they started doing this in video form. The annual report is an animation that includes voices from different areas of their community, from different demographics, and all kinds of folks who are involved with the RRC. And it's very clear about their what they do, about what their values are, about what matters to them. And it's done in this very shareable way that invites conversation, and they're actually really wonderful about responsiveness and about listening to their community and responding to concerns or questions or comments around these annual reports and the other pieces of content that they release out into the world. I'll use I don't mean to get on a soapbox or anything. I'll use an example from my own work where I had a big moment of needing to work transparently, and so as Lisa mentioned in the beginning, my other hat is running ELI Talks, which is ostensibly a TED-style program where we film speakers sharing inspired Jewish ideas. And one of the talks that we filmed was a really, I think, especially lovely one by a young woman named Pam Schuller, who is a comedian and an inclusion advocate. And she talked about her experience with Tourette's syndrome, and being diagnosed at one point with the worst case of Tourette's known to man, and being really almost entirely rejected from the Jewish community, from her synagogue, really, because of the tics and the other pieces that come along with that particular disease. And she talked about her journey through that, and rediscovering Judaism's roots and inclusion and being welcomed back into the community. And it was a really amazing talk. We were so excited to share it. It got great traction. And then suddenly I got this email on the left-hand side of the screen from an inclusion advocacy group that basically said, "You've got this great video, but the subtitles are totally wrong. YouTube automatically generates these subtitles on any video that gets uploaded, and they say some pretty ridiculous things that make it completely impossible for anyone with any kind of hearing issue to really understand the video." And I had this moment where I was just stopped dead in my tracks, and I said, wow, this video about inclusion is itself not at all inclusive. And so what I ended up doing, like a good program director, is I went in and corrected those subtitles, which is something that you can do inside of YouTube, and wrote back to this organization and said that I'd make the change, and then wrote about my mistake on the C3 blog. And this was a really powerful moment for me, so I wanted to share my learning, and it was a way to also use that as a teachable moment for the rest of the community. That when we put this kind of content out into the world, we need to be thoughtful about how the media matches the message. We need to be thoughtful about who's going to be reading and watching our content. And that level of transparency was really appreciated, first of all, by the woman who had sent me this email initially, and they ended up sharing that video more and have gotten more involved in ELI Talks since then. And by the community at large. It made the video more useful. It made it match its own values better. And I think it developed a level of trust with the speaker and with the network that we were involved in that otherwise existed. Not only making that change, but being public about it, and sharing that this was a mistake, that we corrected it, that we're learning as we go forward, and this is a value that we'll continue to hold dear. And so in general, I think fostering transparency is about showing instead of telling who you are, really demonstrating, just as in, again, taking those human skills that we've learned since the very beginning and bringing them into this digital world, and walking the walk, not just talking the talk. Sharing the story of the process, giving those insider moments, can be a really interesting and valuable way to show some transparency. Admitting mistakes. We all screw up. It's going to happen. But really, people and social media are very forgiving and more appreciative of admitting those mistakes, I think, than of trying to use your communications to cover them up or sweep them under the rug. Celebrating success on the flip side of it, giving credit where credit is due. This is a great place to share those moments of joy and pride and nachas, if you will, in the members of your community, in this shareable, built for social kind of world. Lisa, any questions or anything that you'd like to add to this section?
No questions that have come up. I will just add that transparency in any relationship is the foundation of trust. And as synagogue leaders, whether you're staff or board members, you want and need your community to trust you. Trust your budgeting, trust your decision making, and for their ongoing commitment to the community in terms of the people and to the synagogue in terms of paying dues or making donations or whatever. That trust is really critical. And we've seen a number of examples from congregations where greater transparency around certain things, as well as a culture of transparency much more broadly, has been really critical for longevity of membership, for participation in capital campaigns, lots of things. So I think this is a really important piece of the puzzle, and social media gives you a space and a place and a platform and a culture where there's a lot of permission for this to be very transparent, and is a wonderful place to start practicing those skills. And you may find that transparency then trickles into other aspects of your communications and management too.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we'll move on to the next one. Coming up on our last 15 minutes. Hope everybody's feeling energized and ready to take on this last one, which is authenticity. How do you interact? And I equated this at the beginning with this probably unfamiliar term that comes from the Talmud of toho kavaro. The inside is like the outside, and that's what authenticity is all about, right? That what you see is what you get. And the Talmud talks about how a tzaddik, a righteous person, is gold on the inside and gold on the outside. There's somebody who are what they look like, they are what they say they are through and through. And this really comes down to, in the digital world, how you interact. And as we said from the beginning, in the age that we're moving away from broadcast and we're moving into this networked communication, how you interact is so key to establishing a meaningful presence, to building your community, to being part of the conversation and not just delivering content outward to that in that hub and spoke fashion. And so let's look at a couple examples of this happening. So this is another synagogue that I would recommend following on Facebook and Twitter and wherever else you can find them, just for the sake of learning from their example. Hevra Ahavat Yisrael. It is a Chabad synagogue in Brooklyn, New York. They are not a Chabad house that does outreach to other Jews. They are by and for the Chabad Lubavitch community, and but they run much like a Chabad house. And their Facebook page, this lovely image that's their header image, is actually a painting of the community by someone in the community. And so they're very explicitly at the very top of their Facebook page saying who they are and what they care about. And this is a very creative group that's full of artists and musicians, and they have an incredible amount of talent in this relatively small community. And using this platform as a place to honor and showcase that talent in a way that also highlights the individual members of the community, I think is a really beautiful move on their part. And this other example is a very sort of mundane moment. They took a picture during an everyday meeting of a bunch of the young guys in the synagogue getting together and talking business, and shared it. And as you see at the bottom, they are being very responsive, and they're engaging with their community and doing it in a cute way that shows some personality and really echoes who they are on land online. Another example from a different kind of synagogue, Sixth and I in Washington, D.C. I love these examples because they are so sort of everyday. And this is a great example of something that I think Lisa mentioned closer to the beginning of our time together about giving a human face and a general sense of humanity to an organization. People don't talk to institutions. People don't talk to organizations. People talk to people. And so when you're out there in the digital world and thinking about what the voice is of your organization, the more human it can be, the stronger the interaction is going to be, and the more likely that people will continue to engage with you. And so these examples of Sixth and I coming in and saying, "Hey neighbor, can't wait to come over for a bite," or responding to this other to Raina's comment about getting the calendar in the mail and saying, "Hey, those high holy days, they sneak up on you," and empathizing with their community. There are these tiny, tiny little moments that aren't just happening between Sixth and I, or whoever's behind their social media, and this other person that's interacting with them online, but this is a totally public communication that anyone can go back and take a look at and get a sense from that feed of who Sixth and I is and what they're all about, and whether that's the kind of place that I would want to spend my time. And so there are these little moments that add up to a lot. There's a couple other examples that I think are really beautiful and speak to Lisa's earlier comments about the questions about bagels or muffins are go over better in a Facebook group than questions about your political feelings about the current Israeli government or whatever it may be. The example on the left from the San Diego Jewish Academy is a really simple and powerful moment of giving a face to an institution with a simple introduction. Ever wonder who the voice of SDJ's Facebook page is? Well, guess no longer. Here I am. This is Joshua. And all of these people are suddenly chiming in and saying hello to Joshua because they're not going to talk to an institution. They want to talk to Josh. And Josh is coming back in and saying his thank yous and also continuing the conversation. So, for instance, when he does more than say thanks for responding all, but then follows up with, do you have any sort of information or post you would like to hear about on Facebook? What can I do for you? What kind of value can I provide? What do you want to see here? And it's a very nice moment that now that he's got these folks' attention, and now that this post is likely coming up in more and more people's feeds on Facebook, because that's how Facebook operates, he's using that as an opportunity to really get a sense of how can we use this space as a way to build the community and continue this conversation. And this other example over here on the right from Pam Barkley, who asks very simply, what's the best place around here to get challah? Is another great example, like the bagels versus muffins question. We're very carb focused today, I guess. But she's asking a question that takes no time to answer, and in which everyone is an expert. There is no wrong answer. And despite whatever little debates, because of whatever little debates come up between all of these people who are rallying for their particular bakery, that's going to build a sense of comfort and just a social culture, as Lisa referred to it as before. This is going to build the foundation for the interactions to come, and it's these kinds of moments that help you lay the foundation for having those richer conversations, for maybe moving from talking about challah to talking about God, or to talking about Israel or Syria or whatever it may be. You got to start somewhere, and with Facebook and Twitter and all these other platforms at our disposal, getting people to share a little bit about themselves is really the foundation of engagement. And as you can see, Pam also is interacting very authentically. She's chiming back in and responding to people's comments and being attentive and listening, not just posting the question and then ignoring it or waiting for the comments to pile in, but really acting as that hostess and following up with the comments that come through.
You know what I love about this one, Miriam, is that Pam Barkley, who at this time was the director of education at this synagogue, knows, you would think, where to get challah, right? So she's asking a question not at all for her own information, although later in the conversation she says, really? I don't think I've ever had fairway challah. So she's kind of surprised, but she asks the question in order to create a space for people to discuss with one another and to provide some value to one another. And I think that's incredibly insightful. One question just came up related to this, which while we're on this slide, I'd just like to voice, which is about pages versus groups and about letting anyone post to a synagogue Facebook page. And Suzanne, who asked the question, I think was really insightful because Pamela Barkley here in this challah example is posting this to a group. So she's showing up as her own name with her own photo rather than, you know, the name of the synagogue and the logo. So I'm curious if you have any comments, you know, about how to use a group differently than a page, or how to make a page feel as personal as possible, and how much to open these things up.
Sure. So we'll talk about opening up at the very end of this presentation, but I think there's the question of page versus group is one that comes up often. I think that thinking of your Facebook page as the sort of living organizational presence online and thinking of groups as subsets of your community is one way to go. With groups, they have technological differences. They function very differently. They're really intended for person-to-person interaction and can be really nice spaces for gathering subsets of your community. For instance, all of the parents in the early childhood program at your congregation, for instance, could have their own Facebook group where they're not just being informed about what's happening with their children's education, but they're also using that space to talk about ride shares or to swap ideas about challah, or to just, you know, come together as parents of these very young children who are, you know, going through similar struggles at that, you know, that stage of life and can relate to one another. Whereas a page is, I've heard, and maybe Lisa, I got this from you, but the thinking of a page as more than a broadcast channel, but as you're posting, to think of yourself as kind of the host of a party, and what are the little elements that you would want to throw into that party in order to help draw people to your space, in order to help the conversation go along, in order to help people meet one another while they're in that space. The one metaphor that I've also used is that the content that you share is a campfire, right? It's not the end all and be all. You need those people around there engaging with that content for the campfire to be at all meaningful and for it to cast any warmth on anyone. And so I think a strategic combination of pages and personal profiles, and making sure that when you're sharing something on a page that you're also inviting different people to jump in on the comments or to share to their own networks, or bringing that content from the page into the group or whatever it may be, is really the best way to go. But that's something that that each congregation, each synagogue is going to need to decide on their own based on the goals that they have, first of all, and also based on capacity. What's your bandwidth for actually managing all of these different things? If you're, I never would encourage anyone to create work for themselves that is not going to have some payoff in adding value to the community or helping you achieve your goals. So I would say just a last few notes on fostering authenticity. If you care, share. You know, people want to know what you're all about, and so it's okay to choose things that are beyond just promoting programs, but stuff that matters to your community and is indicative of the kind of vision and values that you are trying to live as a synagogue. Asking questions is huge, and we've seen a couple of examples of that. Just inviting that engagement, inviting people to share their opinions and their suggestions really fosters conversations, and making sure that you're tuning into that conversation and responding and using it as an opportunity to introduce people to one another and playing that party host, that's huge. That's what develops a sense of authenticity, and that's what also builds that truly networked communication and gets you beyond the hub and spoke model. Thinking about language and personality is a really important piece and will help your community cut through all of the clutter that you happen to find online. As soon as you get on Facebook and you have 150 friends, suddenly there's a million things out there to sift through. And why would anyone pay attention to your little synagogue? Having a really distinctive voice, a distinctive point of view, a set of values that you live by and that are embodied in anything that you share out into the world is going to help set you apart. Create a sense of distinctiveness and value out in this digital space. In general, pictures and video are really great. The web is becoming increasingly visual, as I believe you learned in an earlier webinar, and they're also a great way of showing that authenticity, of literally showing the inside is like the outside, and connects faces and makes your institution feel more human. And again, sharing stories in moments is a great way, not just going out into the world and sharing things when they're completed, but giving folks a glimpse along the way is great for both transparency and authenticity, and will help build that sense of trust that we talked about earlier as well. With that, I know we're coming close to the end of our time, so I just wanted to say one last bit about this idea of control. I think and Lisa and I have both seen this in our work in the Jewish community and outside of it. There's some fear, there's some trepidation around jumping into social media fully and deciding how transparent you want to be and what you want to share, because there's a sense that you will lose control of your message. And I don't want to invalidate that concern. You will lose control of your message. The thing to acknowledge, though, is whether or not you ever really had it. As we put, even in the hub and spoke model, and we're living in a system where we're delivering content, where we're putting messages out into the world, people have always talked about your programs, your synagogue, in the parking lot, in the grocery store, when they run into each other picking up their kids from school. And the biggest thing that's different when it comes to the world of networks and social media is that, first of all, scale, that those conversations can happen on a much bigger level, but also this level of publicness that we're living in makes it possible for us to listen to those conversations, to have insight into those conversations, and to join the conversation instead of trying to control every aspect of the message itself. And I think you'll find that loosening those controls and substituting conversation for control will ultimately lead to a stronger, more trusting community, will lead to a more invested community than simply packaging and delivering a finely tuned message ever would. And it's a process. Do it in steps. Start with what's comfortable, because it is real and it is scary and all of that. But again, it's a very forgiving kind of space to be living in. And when you take these three values that we talked about to heart, I think it will also be a very valuable space that will ultimately help you build a stronger community and a stronger synagogue.
Fantastic.
So
Thank
with
you,
that,
Miriam.
Lisa, yeah, my pleasure.
Let's see. The last
Any last
couple
notes or comments or
questions
questions?
that came in are, real kind of talk list detail things, and I have a big long list of resources to send to people. So difference of pages versus groups versus profiles. What's a hashtag? A couple people asked questions about um, kind of managing who's posting what, or what if something inappropriate happens, right? There's a lot of positive comments about your cartoon of feeling out of control. Um, and nervousness appropriately around it. Miriam
Sure.
and I, along with some others, wrote something called the Social Media Policy Workbook, which answers a lot of those questions that came in. It is a free PDF download. So I will include that in our follow-up email, and questions about kind of control and permissions and when to censor, how to respond to things is all in there, and we hope you will find it useful. And I will include some links to many of the examples that Miriam showed today so that you can follow those accounts and poke around and see some of those examples. We love to see what you're doing as well. So as you take these ideas and implement them, please feed back to us how it's going, what you're doing, what you're learning, and feel free to ask us any questions that come up. You can just reply to the emails that you've been getting with the login and follow-up information, and that will come directly to me. So thank you, Miriam, so much. Thank you to UJA Federation of New York for sponsoring this 5-part series. We hope to see you on the next 2 webinars. I'll put those dates and times in our follow-up email as well to remind you. And hope everyone has fun implementing these ideas. Thanks, Miriam, for being with us today.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Good luck. Have fun.
Bye-bye.